All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Design, Build, Hunt podcast, which is presented by Whitetail Partners. Tonight, I've got Jake Hendrickson on the line with me from Michigan. Jake, what's going on, buddy?
Not a whole lot, man. How are you, Josh?
Doing pretty well. It's always fun when I can just get one of you guys on the line. Obviously, I love having the big group and all, but it's cool to get just one of you to like take a deep dive on a specific topic, catch up with you, see how you're doing. And the intro part is just always way easier because I can just say, how you doing? And just one person's like, yeah, we're good. You know what I mean?
There's no pause. There's no
That's right.
awkward pause, and then everyone speaks at once.
That's right. We don't have to do the awkward, like figuring out who goes first and who answers what. But Jake, man, we're sitting here. Gosh, what is today? October 21st. And it's the night of October 21st. You had soccer practice tonight for your kids. I had a softball game and an event at school tonight. So like we're kind of burning the midnight oil just a little bit, getting a podcast out here. But man, it's getting right. It's getting to that time of year when things are really, really looking good. I think this is going to be a timely episode for us. We're going to be talking about phases of the rut, kind of how your hunting strategy changes as the phases of the rut change. And I've talked with some folks lately. I think there are some kind of misconceptions out there as well when it comes to hunting the rut. And then obviously there's the whole issue of, if I've got some bucks on my property that I've been after, or if I'm just, haven't really had anything and, kind of talking about the bonus buck, I think is what Lee from Tennessee calls them, the bonus bucks. And, how do you go about hunting for those specific deer? So a lot to cover that I think is going to kind of maybe set us straight here. But I know here in Georgia, things have been heating up. We have seen, bucks starting to look a lot more interested. I was just telling you about the backyard 10, which has been just a fun thing to watch. To all of a sudden, like, oh, he might daylight. And if he does, this is not going to be good for him because he is 45 yards out my back door. So that may have to become a thing. But my wife saw a really good buck this morning, nose and does around in a field. And so things are heating up. What are things doing there in Michigan?
They're heating up as well. Like we're starting to see on a lot of the properties that we're hunting, bucks are starting to move a little bit more. They're getting closer to daylight, if not moving in daylight. Not all the time, but before last light and after first light. And we're also starting to see on this property right here behind my house, like a lot of new bucks. So different properties are set up a little bit differently, different types of habitat in neighborhoods. This property here, we don't see many summer bucks. We don't have any summer food around, like big summer food. So all the bucks are off somewhere else. And that's okay. I don't have to feed them for the summer. But like this is the time of year in October when they start to shift back to their fall range. And right now we're starting to see different bucks like every week. It's kind of fun. Every time that cell camera goes off, you look at it, it's like, oh my goodness, like which deer is that? Like that's a new one. So it's kind of fun this time of year because you're starting to see more bucks as they start to move around a little bit more. It's starting to cool off a little bit, and they're starting to get that pre-rut itch.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So you're kind of getting, I guess maybe a feel for your inventory at a date that's a lot later, maybe than most guys would be, trying to count their bucks. Are you trying to catch up and figure out, okay, is this one from last year, or are you just like, hey, good enough, I know he's there?
Yeah, so I'll use, I guess, two different properties as an example here. So the one behind my house, the one that I just talked about, is a great fall property. We're trying to make it better fall property, but it doesn't have a lot of summer food. So we don't have a whole lot of summer bucks. Honestly, I think I didn't have a buck on camera from like mid-May, maybe up until August. So it was a big
Wow.
long stretch where there's no bucks on camera. Doe family groups, they hang around, but the bucks are gone. But late September, early October, those bucks start filtering back in. So you're right. Now it's time to start to inventory these deer. Which deer are the ones from last year? And we leave our cameras up, so I do know some deer that made it through last season just because I had them on camera last January, and some of those deer are back. I can tell they're the same deer. So yeah, inventory on this property, and then a different property that we hunt is kind of set up differently. We have big summer food right next to the property, and we have a good fall property. So the deer that we're seeing in the summer are the same deer that we're seeing in the fall. So that property, we already know basically in the summer which deer we're going to be after. Some of them disperse a little bit further away, and we might not see them until later in the rut. But most of those deer, they settle in somewhere close to where right now is when we can start most of the time targeting those deer when they start to daylight a little bit more.
Right, right. So when you've got a property like this where you do experience, quite a bit of a shift, right? Like they're not even on your property May to August, really. Um, are you prioritizing those stand locations that are, are they terrain based? Are they just historically, it's a good spot? Are they, you've just, I guess, manipulated the habitat in such a way to create these spots? What does that look like? Because, man, it'd be tough. I mean, being in October, okay, we're getting our first pictures of this buck October 15th. That could be tough, getting that intel that late in the game, and trying to react, I guess, or change and shift according to what that buck is doing.
Right. So how we set this property up is very similar to any other property we try to set up, and that's you try to establish a bed to feed pattern. Right. So you're trying to establish these bedding areas, food sources, and travel corridors to connect everything together. And then you're going to have these large community areas like the scrapes, the water holes, and these are going to be like major intersections on the property. And even though these bucks are not here in, let's say most of the summer, when they come on the property, they know right where to go. They're following the scent from the rest of the deer herd. They're following where these does go. So they're hitting these same major hot spots. They're hitting the water holes. They're hitting the mock scrapes. And you hunt the property in a very similar way. It's just that you might not have intel on that deer, like what is he doing on a regular basis. So once he comes in, he kind of finds his spot, and then he'll start using the property like most of the other deer do. He finds his bedding area, he gets up, hits that scrape, hits that water hole, and then travels to the afternoon food source. But I will
Right.
say,
So,
oh, go ahead, sorry, buddy.
I was just going to say, so it's more like, hey, we've got these spots dialed in,
Yep.
and it may be just a matter of, okay, if this buck moves back in, which three does he really show that he likes?
Yep. And depending on where you're at, so like on this property here, I only have about 30-ish acres of huntable area, like to give to the deer. And I don't want to push into the whole thing. So I have kind of stands and strategic spots to kind of hunt, these intersections, these hot spots, but they're also kind of easy spots to get into. They're fringe-ish spots where I can have a safe wind. So depending on the wind direction, my stand is kind of picked for me, right? So if it's a west wind, and it's a morning hunt, I have certain stands I can pick from, and I'm going to try to pick the best one based on the intel I have. But I might not. I'm not going to be able to pick from all of my stands based on the wind direction and the time of day. So your stands are kind of pre-picked for you depending on how much property you have in the wind direction and the time of day.
Right, right. All right, so let's zoom out here and
Yep.
talk big picture on the topic of the day, right? I think the title of this one's going to be something like understanding the phases of the rut or something like that. Walk me through, and obviously dates are going to differ. I mean, I hunt our property in Alabama. We've got our rut is February, so that's going to be very different than there were places here in Georgia where a peak rut is October. I know in Florida there's some peak rut going on August, July down in real South Florida. Obviously, Michigan's going to fall in that like mid-November kind of traditional, what people think of when they think of the rut. But let's talk phases, sort of big picture. You can throw out the Michigan dates. People can kind of filter through and say, okay, what does that mean for me? But big picture, what do the phases of the rut look like spanning a deer season?
So for me, I guess the different phases we'll start the entire season. And so the first part of the season is more of I'd say early season hunting. That's where these deer are a lot of times still on their summer patterns, bed to feed. You can sometimes catch a buck on his summer patterns. And then there's a lot of change. A lot of those summer food sources, they kind of start to go dormant. The cover is changing. A lot of those leaves are falling off the trees. The grass, the annual grasses and weeds are starting to die back. The cover is changing. Food is changing. Deer start to shift into their fall ranges. And this is what the October lull is for the most part. There's just a lot of change. Deer are changing their patterns. And I would say that's the second phase of the season. And then right on the heel of the October lull, is kind of right now in Michigan, like October 21st or October 20 for like a lot of times on our properties is when that pre-rut starts to amp up a little bit. And it's not just like, okay, it's the pre-rut, boom, these deer are all over the place uh, doing their pre-rut activities. It's kind of a little bit of a slow build. Some years it might be on the 18th of October, some years it might be on the 24th of October, but it's right around this the 20th of October that we start to notice bucks, uh, you know, working scrapes, being a little bit more active, daylighting a little bit more, and then I would say that ramps up a little bit more each day, and you're going to see more activity, more daylight activity, kind of like on the weather, depending on the weather, and then until about maybe Halloween or like early the first couple days of November, and then you start to get into that, you know, chasing, seeking phase where these bucks are actively going after does. You're going to have does that are coming into heat up here, and those bucks are kind of going a little crazy. You'll have a lot of times a lot of bucks on one doe because like, she might be the first one coming into estrus. And then after that phase, so a few days later, more does are coming into heat, and then that's what I would call the lockdown phase or the tending phase, where there's just not a lot going on sometimes. Like you might go out to the tree and you might sit there for all day and not even see a mature doe or a buck. You might see the fawns because they're not ready to be bred yet. But like, it might be a boring sit because those bucks have those does locked
Right.
down in that cover. And then
Right.
after the lockdown phase here in Michigan is right around like November 15, and we notice at least on the properties that we hunt that the movement really slows down after the 15th of November. And there is just so much stress out there in the deer woods. There are so many hunters hitting the woods that it just, I don't know if it knocks them out of it or what goes on, but it movement completely shuts down. And we don't even really hunt our property that hard. And like this property that my house is on behind my, like I didn't hunt that one time last year. And I can tell you, even without hunting a property, it still experiences the same shock from that November
Mm.
15 gun season. Now, after that, we give our property 100% back to the deer. They slowly start to kind of get the confidence back up that this property is safe, and they start moving around a little bit more. But and you will still see bucks, kind of with does if they've made it through the gun opener, and then really, I would say Thanksgiving, it kind of slows down again, and then you get a little bit of a flurry again in like that first to second week of December. There's another little flurry of rut activity, and that I think coincides with those fawns. They reach the weight where their body kind of uh, puts them into estrus for the first time, and so then those
Right.
bucks they go and breed those uh, first year fawns, those
Right.
doe
Right.
fawns.
So let's talk about this then. We've got, I guess, on a managed property, and that's, this is the Design Build Hunt podcast. So that's what we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about properties that you have done something to try to alter the way deer travel through that property. That may look like just a food plot. You might have only done food plots. Well, that is habitat improvement that changes the way deer relate to the landscape. It might just be something like a corn feeder. I wouldn't call that habitat improvement, but I would say it manipulates the way deer, uh, move across the landscape. And hey, I've got a lot of feeders. I think I took a picture the other day of 500 pounds of corn and sent it to you guys,
Yeah,
and was like, "Hey, this is Southern Habitat Management."
yeah, the
Uh,
Georgia food plot.
that's right. That's right. The Georgia food plot. No, it was trying to get some cameras out, trying to get a little bit of intel this time of year. But so, we're thinking about bucks that are on these properties that we have tried to enhance and tried to manipulate to some degree how the deer move across the landscape. What does that look like then when it comes to the faces of the rut? Because when people think about the rut, they think, hey, bucks start running looking for does, and they might be in this county today, the next county over tomorrow, and sometime around Thanksgiving, things will calm down. Right. So it's going to be a month of just absolute craziness. Who knows what the bucks are doing? We just got to go sit. And if you're hunting here in the South, the rule of thumb is, hey, we go sit where we can see a really long way because we hunt the rut with rifles. We can go sit where we can see a really long way, which is actually a really good rut strategy. Go figure. Um, and wait for the deer to come to us. But what does that look like for you when you're thinking, okay, I'm going to hunt my property during this early pre-rut, or as we're getting into that seeking and chasing phase, or during the lockdown phase? How do you approach each one of those phases a little bit differently?
So I guess we'll start with the pre-rut, and the pre-rut is the time when we have a really good opportunity to harvest one of the bucks that is using our property. So the deer that we know is living on or near our property, this is the time of year that he's gonna make some mistakes. Yeah, he's gonna start walking around a little bit more in daylight in the morning and in the evening. And this is so if you've kept your property, this is a managed property. You've kept your property pressure free up until this point. There's a really good chance that you're going to get a crack at this deer within the next 10 days. And after that next 10 days, after November, it gets a little bit harder. It's still, you still have a good chance of getting him, but bucks right now, they're fairly predictable. It's still hunting, it's still difficult, but this is going to be one of the best opportunities to kill a buck that you have on your property that's using your property somewhat consistently.
Right. And so, we're right here at the kickoff of the pre-rut. I mean, we're going to launch this episode here in just a couple of days. It will be, pre-rut time. How would you tell somebody, like, what are the
Yep.
setups that you're going to tell those people to get out there and get on? Are we talking food sources? Are we hunting mornings at this point? Does weather dictate what we're going to do?
Yeah. So strategy right now for me is I really want to be focused, almost hyper focused on scrapes. So that's what these bucks are doing right now is they're laying down a ton of sign at scrapes. They're making uh, a lot of random scrapes, but you want to be focused on the ones that are in the same place every year. They're like perennial scrapes, community scrapes, primary scrapes. There's a lot of different names for them, but they're the scrapes that are in the same place on your property every single year. Bucks are going to start hitting. You probably have cameras on them right now. And these are the scrapes that the bucks are going to start working a lot, and this is where you're going to have an opportunity at them. Hopefully during daylight hours, they're going to start presenting shots. And you mentioned, when are we going to be hunting? So early in the season, I don't like to hunt a whole lot of mornings just because it's risky. You can always kill a deer in the morning early season, but you have a pretty good chance of spooking that buck as opposed to killing him. And so now is the time where, again, these bucks are really active, and they're keeping tabs on these doe family groups. So he's out in those fields at night, or at that food source, whatever that is. And so you have an opportunity now in the morning to kind of sneak back not in the cover, but close to that bedding cover. And as he's coming back from that food source, you have a chance of getting a shot opportunity. And even if he doesn't necessarily walk by your stand on his way back to bed, a lot of times these bucks during the pre-rut, they get up in the morning and they start working all these scrapes again. So even if he goes and lays down, you still have a chance as he gets up to start working these scrapes. This is a great time of year to really get those, when those older bucks are going to be on their feet. And the types of setups, I think I talked about it there for a morning sit. In the morning, we really want to be closer to those bedding areas, those doe bedding areas. That's where these bucks are spending a lot of time. Again, they're keeping tabs on these does. In the morning, these does, they're in those bedding areas and throughout the day. So that's what these bucks are going to be laying down a lot of sign, just kind of keeping tabs on them. And in the afternoon, those does are headed to the food source. And so that's kind of where you want to be. Not necessarily on the food source, but back in the cover a little bit, again, on another one of those scrapes, because that buck's going to work that scrape right before he goes and checks on those does again. So me, I'm hyper focused on scrapes for the next 10 days, and I am hunting mornings, and I'm really trying to get close to where these does are.
Right. No, that's so good, man. I think back to my earlier hunting career, and because I did the whole hunting media thing, and I'm watching these shows, my idea of what a buck was doing was always like, okay, he's out in the fields at night. Even though I'm in Alabama, there were like no ag fields around me, but I'm like, he's out in a field somewhere at night feeding, and then he's going to work his way back to bedding, and he's going to lay down, if I'm lucky, I'm going to see him 30 minutes after first light because that's when bucks get back to their bed. And he's going to lay down, and my hunt's basically done for the day. So if I didn't see something at first light, I'm like discounting the whole hunt. I'm done. But as I've gotten older and I've stuck it out and I'm really paying better attention or have paid better attention to what these deer are doing, I'm seeing exactly what you said. Yeah, they may be back in bed, before the sun comes up, but they're going to get up later in the morning, mid morning, and run around and check those scrapes. And it's actually going to relate to we're talking about sort of that seeking and chasing phase here in just a minute, where it's almost like the bucks go lay down first thing in the morning. I almost never see them, but around 9, 10, 11, noon, that's when I see them just crashing through bedding areas or cruising downwind of a bedding area all of a sudden, and yeah, that I wonder how many deer that cost me, not taking that into account. But yeah, so focused on scrapes, we're getting back there into the cover. How are you setting up on these food sources? Is it just, hey, I want to get to a food source where I know that there's going to be a lot of does in the evenings, or is it, hey, it needs to be closer to cover, have a lot of does, and have a really good scrape? Like, what's the qualifications, I guess, on which of your food sources you're going to be hunting?
I think you nail it. The more of those that you can kind of check off the list, the better. So in the afternoon, you want to be targeting a food source. That's where those deer are going to be going in the afternoon. And I like to be hunting the travel corridor that's leading to the food source. So a lot of times I don't want to be sitting on that food source. I want to be either in the cover or I want to be hunting on like a staging food source. So that right now that could be like a white oak, it could be an apple tree, it could be a really small food plot within the timber. Then I would sit over that because the deer aren't going to stay there. They're going to leave that and then go to the destination. So you want to be hunting either traveling to the destination or over a smaller supplemental food source. And then if you have recent intel that the does are there every night, like that's like it's a hot apple tree right now, it's dropping apples, this is where they're at, then that's one that I'd want to sit at. And also you want to think ahead, because if you know that apple tree's there, then back in May you want to be hanging a muck scrape. So that way these deer can start using that scrape. They start communicating there. They get conditioned to use it, so that when you want to go hunt, they're going to use it. And those bucks are going to start hitting that scrape. So then you can kind of have all those things that you just mentioned checked off the box. So in the afternoon, that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm trying to find a food source that I know these deer are traveling to, and then setting up over one of those perennial scrapes. And if I can, this is maybe another strategy that we'll talk about. If that has a water hole or a water source at it, then that's going to put it on a premium. Especially this year here in Michigan, we have a crazy drought going on. I think it's rained maybe 3 times since August 1st, and it's crazy dry. So all of my water holes, that's the first thing that these deer are doing before they're going to the food source. So I'll have like a bedding area, travel corridor, hitting, and that's maybe a mock scrape that's close to that bedding area with a water hole, and then it goes to a staging plot, then a destination plot. That water hole, they are there like clockwork. And water holes are always good, even on years without a drought. But this year, it's like every single day. I've got a few
Mm.
different properties with cell cameras on them. Today, I got a picture from two different properties, deer hitting the water hole at the same time. It is,
Wow.
it's like clockwork.
Yeah. Yeah, we down here in Georgia, we've had a pretty crazy drought as well, despite having a couple of hurricanes, that did bring some rain. But we've seen the same thing. Our water holes have been insane. Client water holes have been going off. I think one of Greg's clients, actually in West Virginia, killed a deer over a water hole. I mean, they've been really really good for us this year.
Yeah, yep.
Uh, so let's talk about let's talk about, are there any big don'ts? We're right here in the pre-rut. uh we're getting some of those cooler temperatures. Folks are excited to get out in the woods. Any cautions that you would give to people, or are there any mistakes that people should avoid heading into the, I guess, the pre-rut time frame?
Well, you still got to be smart about it. You still have to have clean access. Don't hunt a stand with a poor wind, because this deer, he's moving around during daylight because he feels comfortable right now. Like if it's one of the bucks that is I think Lee calls them resident bucks. If it's a resident
Hmm.
buck on your property, you know, he's comfortable there. You've done a great job up until this point. You want to be this is a time to start getting a little bit more aggressive, you know, pushing into those better stand locations, hunting mornings, but don't get so aggressive that you're hunting like a poor wind. Like if your scent's blowing right into that bedding area, right towards that scrape, not a good time to sit that stand. Even if it's a good weather day, even if the cold front's coming through and that's your favorite stand, the wind's not right, don't do it, because then you're going to educate that deer, and then you could kind of ruin it for the next 8 days or however many days left of the pre-rut you have. So you still got to be smart about it. But I would say, you know, now is the time to be a little bit more aggressive. You've been patient up until this point. Now we can start hunting those better stand locations. We can start pushing in a little bit, but maybe don't push in, like depending on how your property's set up. So I've got stands that are kind of on the fringes of the cover. The pre-rut stands that these deer are going to kind of cruise along the downwind side of that bedding area with a scrape right there. But I also have stands like right in the dead center of all that thick stuff. So where these deer will bed down, and that's like really really aggressive. And so if I haven't gotten a deer at a certain point, you know, it's like, you know what, I'm just going to go in there. Now is not the time for that. So if you have stands that are really, really aggressive sit, not the time for that. That's maybe later in the rut phases.
Right, right. No, that makes a ton of sense. So when you're getting into the pre-rut, I mean, obviously, a cold front blowing through during the pre-rut is going to make pretty much everybody want to go get in a stand somewhere. What if you don't have, let's say you've got a 30-acre piece that maybe it starts to pop off right around the pre-rut or right around the rut, and you don't have those resident bucks showing up on camera, and you really want to go hunting. So, what how are you going to approach those hunts maybe a little bit differently than if you say, hey, I've had, this buck's been hitting this food source 20 minutes after, last light. Now there's a cold front moving through. I'm going to go in there and get him. Well, it's a very different thing to say, it's October 25th. I haven't really seen many bucks, but I still want to go hunt. So what are you going to do in that situation?
I would still hunt, but maybe like, so it depends on what you think is going to happen during the rut. Like, do you have a pretty good area that uh, you do have those roamer bucks come in, those random bucks come in, and you don't really want to be, if you have that situation, then you don't really want to be spooking out your property and getting really aggressive if you don't have a target. Uh, like, but again, as long as you're playing it smart, you don't know when that next buck's going to shift his way, back to your property. So I think I would still sit those same stands. I would still hunt the
Okay.
mornings like I would like hunt the bedding in the morning and hunt the food in the afternoon, because as you really don't. This is a crazy time of year. Like I told you about the property here. Like we're getting new bucks on camera, not every day, but we're getting a new one every week, and or maybe two a week, and you just don't know when that next one's going to show up. So we don't have like a shooter here yet, but that could happen tomorrow. And then
Right.
like if I'm in the stand when that happens, it's like, man, there he is. So I would still be out there, play it smart, play the wind. Don't get too aggressive, but you still want to be out there because you don't know, when that roamer buck is going to move through, or maybe it's a buck from last year that just hasn't shifted back in yet.
Right. Man, it's so interesting you bring that up. I have a buddy up in Wisconsin who actually sent me a picture this afternoon. He's been watching this spot. He got permission. He's got a really good property, but it's very, very small. So he got permission on probably pushing 10 more acres up this little valley, and it is going to absolutely open up his hunting. 10 more acres doesn't sound like much, but it's adding a ton for his hunting. But he's just been watching his cameras because he hasn't really been getting anything as far as like a shooter. He's had some 2-year-olds, and in this area, he can let 3-year-olds walk, and he does so every year and doesn't have to really worry about it too much. It's an area that all the neighbors are kind of on the same page. They're trying to get 5, 6-year-old deer. Wouldn't you know it?
Mhm.
This after he's had no shooters, he's had some 3-year-olds, kind of getting close to daylight, and then all of a sudden today, boom, 5-year-old, an hour before dark, there he is in front of the camera. And it's like, never could have anticipated that. He's not hunting because he's watching the cameras. And boom, mature buck, nice, typical Wisconsin 10 point that, you know, pretty much anybody would be happy with. There he is on October 21st when when really he shouldn't have been there. So, all right. Anything else when it comes to pre-rut? I mean, we've covered kind of understanding the phases. We've covered rut strategy or pre-rut strategy. We've covered maybe what not to do. Any like last minute things, or maybe we should address calling. Are you calling a lot during this time?
Not really right now. I'll bring my like grunt call. I always have the grunt
Okay.
with me, but I'm not going to be like aggressively calling or anything like that. If I see a buck and he's going the wrong way, I'll hit him with a contact grunt. Just to try to get his attention. Say, hey, who's that? Because bucks are kind of they're curious. They're especially if it's an older buck, you might be a little bit more aggressive. Like, hey, who is this? This is my area. You'll want to go check that out. But yeah, I'm not going to be doing like a snort wheeze or aggressive rattling sequence right now. November, then we can start talking about doing a little bit more. But yeah, right now, not really doing like a lot of aggressive calling. But
Right.
but things to touch on for the pre-rut, uh, I would say continue to hunt the weather, hunt those fronts. When the temperature drops, wind speeds die down, rain stops. That's a great time to get in the stand. Sit longer than you think that you should. I'll just try to make it an extra half hour. Whatever your time is, try to make it an extra half hour. But just because you don't know when these bucks are going to move. I was sitting with my son the other day, and one of our older bucks on the property, he was up walking around. I think it was like 9:30 in the morning, and then that evening he was walking around at 5:30. So I mean that's well
Wow.
before last light. So it's like he's up moving around, and before that he was always in the middle of the night. So now is the time when those deer are going to start moving a little bit. So yeah, sit a little bit longer, hunt those scrapes, and still play smart, play the wind, and hunt the cold fronts.
I love it. I love it. And do your best. Keep that property fresh for the rut because I know for many, many people, they love the pre-rut. I know Sam. I think that's like his favorite time of year is the pre-rut. But for a lot of folks, the best is still just a few weeks away. A week and a half to 2 weeks away is when I wouldn't say when you can throw caution to the wind and just go ham about it, but you can certainly, get away with a lot more and be a lot more aggressive here coming up. So, man, I appreciate you joining me this evening for the podcast, Jake. Folks, if you have not already, go check out our YouTube channel. You guys are pumping out a lot of good content over there on the YouTube channel. What's the latest video you've put out?
I don't think it's up there yet, but I think that it's going to be on weather, like using the weather to determine what are those higher probability sits. So that should be the next one. So depending on when this airs, it might already be up there, but yeah, it's on weather.
Okay, excellent, excellent. Hey, what about the moon, man? We have not touched that topic on the podcast. Have you done a lot of moon stuff?
So I don't. So I think that temperature and the time of year, this is my opinion, plays more of a factor in deer movement. But I do think the moon has an impact. Okay, so
Right.
let's say there's a full moon and it's out all night and it's a bright sky, like there's no clouds, you might experience less movement in the morning. That's just what I've noticed. You're less movement in the morning. However, on a new moon, so no moon, maybe even cloud cover, so it's pitch black, right? That morning you might have more action. And I think it's just that the deer they can see better. They're out there in those fields, they're feeding all night, and then they just go lay down and they don't move as often. They're full and they just don't have to move. So, and I've also noticed that when you like this is around the full moon, when you have a rising moon with a setting sun, for I don't know if it's with gravity or what's going on, but man, it,
And
it just feels like there's a lot of activity on those nights. We just had one the other day, so it was like a rising moon with a setting sun, and
yep.
if you can time it, you can't time it because it just happens. But like if there's a cold front that's tied in with that thing, man, the afternoon sit on that one is the one that's can be pretty wild.
Yeah. Those
So yeah, I don't.
I'm not
For
real
for
big
me,
on
the
the moon
moon,
either,
it's
but yeah,
yeah.
I've not been real big on the moon either, but that has been the one. I heard Mark Drury say that in an old VHS tape like 25 years ago or 30 years ago or something crazy like that. Um, but he was talking about a moon rising in the evening with a setting sun, and a moon setting in the morning with a rising sun. Setting about an hour after daylight. Like those evenings when the moon is coming up and the mornings when the sun is still up but going down can be phenomenal. And that I have seen that be consistent. Like, the overhead and underfoot, I've seen, who knows with all of that, but I've seen that be consistent with a rising sun, a rising moon in the evening and a setting moon in the morning. But Jake, man, thanks for joining me this evening. I appreciate it. Folks, get out there and hunt, but not too be careful. Be careful. Get out there and hunt. Enjoy the pre-rut, but the best is still yet to come.